I feel very strong that every human being, I respect them and I want to be friends with them. I don't hate anybody except the perpetrators of the Holocaust. But just to give you an idea how open-minded I am, the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, was the biggest killer in history. He killed over 1 million people. His grandson and I were good friends.
Okay, y'all, today's podcast is a pretty heavy one, but I have to say that it is by far the most special podcast episode I've ever done, with no disrespect to the previous guests, because today's guest is Mr. Ben Lesser, who is a 95-year-old Holocaust survivor. Out of his immediate family of 7, Ben and his sister Lola were the only survivors of the Holocaust. He endured 4 concentration camps, including Auschwitz, 2 death marches, and 2 death trains. I have to admit that before, during, and after this podcast recording, I had nausea and a pit in my stomach as I heard Mr. Lesser's story. I also have to admit that in parts of his story, it was almost like I was hearing a fantasy tale. Not because I didn't believe what he was saying, but because I didn't have any frame of reference for the unspeakable, unjust atrocities that Mr. Lesser endured as a child and a teenager. And if that's the case for me, then I imagine that's the case for many other people as well, which is why it's more important now than ever for people like Mr. Lesser to share their stories. Mr. Lesser has an amazing book entitled Living a Life That Matters, From Nazi Nightmare to American Dream. I'll put a link to that book in the description box below. Please go and purchase a copy of his book, because when you do, the proceeds go to his foundation, the Zachor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation, which encourages today's youth to continue to share the stories of survival long after survivors are gone. So with all that being said, I am very honored and privileged and proud to share with you the life-changing, transformative conversation that I had with Mr. Ben Lesser.
You ask and I'll answer.
Maybe we could just start at the beginning. From some of the articles I've read about you, I understand that you were quite young when the Holocaust first started happening, and I guess the Nazis came and occupied your country. So why don't you just tell us sort of what your first memories of life were like as a child?
I was about 10 and a half years old when the war broke out. In Kraków, Poland, I lived in Kraków. We lived in a apartment house, a 3-story apartment house. The ground floor, we had a big apartment. And one early morning, the whole building started to shake and rattle. So I ran to the window to see what's happening, and I saw tanks were rolling down the street. Following the tanks, they were half-tracks. Every few steps, a soldier would jump out of the half-track, get on the sidewalk, and that's how they occupied the city. There was no fighting. Following them were the Wehrmacht with their shiny black boots. It was quite impressionable for a 10-and-a-half-year-old. But as soon as they passed, my father called us into the dining room, set us kids down on chairs, and said, "Okay, from this moment on, there are no more kids. You're all adults. You'll obey, you will listen, no back talk." And this is how we grew up overnight. My father's business was wine and syrup. He had a wine and syrup manufacturing. He also had a chocolate factory. He was the first one to make chocolate-covered wafers in Poland, which is something like Kit Kat, only in the shape of little animals bears, rabbits, and tinfoil on it. Every time my father would come home, us kids would search his pockets to see what he has, if he has, and he always had some goodies in there. Anyway, one day he went to the business, to the wine and syrup, and it was confiscated. There were guards at the station. They chased him away. He went to the chocolate factory the same way. He was chased away. A man works all his life to build up a little business for himself and to feed the family. Just like that, it's taken away. Only thing I can tell you is I had a wonderful family. We were a family of 7. I had 2 brothers, 2 sisters, and my father and mother and I, we were a family of 7. And out of the 7, the family, only 2 of us survived. My sister Lola and I, we were the only 2 survivors. This is the house that we lived in. These 3 windows were our apartment. Yeah, our apartment. And this is when I went to the window and I looked out and I saw what was happening. On the 5th day of occupation of Krakow, I found out what Nazi brutality was all about. Early in the morning at 5 a.m., a truck pulls up to the building and full of soldiers, and they're banging on the building, and the super came running out. What's going on? All they wanted to know is where the Jewish people lived. And he was quick to oblige. He said, okay, the lessers live here. And there was another family, a husband and a wife, and they had 2 daughters, younger than I. And the mother gave birth to an infant little boy about 2 months earlier. So they came running in, breaking down the door to us, and they were pistol whipping us. We were still in bed. And in their hands they had sacks, they open sacks, and they were yelling, throw in all your valuables, money, gold, silver, anything they can find of value, they threw in. And they're beating up my father to open up the safe. While my father is opening the safe, we hear this terrible screaming from our neighbor's apartment. So my sister Lola and I ran out through our kitchen door to their kitchen door. We came into their apartment, and this is what we saw. We saw this monster was holding the infant little baby by its legs and swinging it and screaming to the parents, make him shut up. The parents and daughters are yelling, our baby, don't hurt our baby. With a smirk on his face, you can see he was enjoying what he was doing. He smashes the baby's head into a doorpost, killing it instantly. It's a memory that won't leave me. That screaming baby in that sudden silence and what came out of his head, my God, I can't forget it. But that wasn't the end. Of course, we jumped on him, and the other soldiers heard something was going on. They came running in, and they pulled us off him, pistol whipping us, and they were a little shocked to see what happened themselves. They said, okay, Hans, let's go. They gathered up all their valuables they collected, threw it into a sack, threw it in the truck and took off. That was only the 5th day of occupation. From that day on, new ordinances started coming in fast and furious. Jewish people had to wear a Star of David on their arms from the age of 4 on up. There was a curfew. You couldn't go out of the house after 7 p.m. Between 7 and 7, you had to be in the house. If you dared to come out, they simply shot you. Every morning, they found dead bodies on the streets that were being shot if you disobey any of these orders. And they had orders you couldn't go travel anymore, you couldn't go in a restaurant, and certain restaurants were forbidden for Jews. A new ordinance came out that the Jewish people may no longer reside in Krakow. If you wanted to live in Krakow, you had to go into the ghetto that they made in Krakow. Well, I don't know if you know what a ghetto was. A very terrible place. I suggest you check it out. Ghetto, Gheoto.
Can you explain for the people who will be watching this video, can you explain to me and to them what a ghetto is?
A ghetto was a terrible place. They put all the Jewish people in the worst section of Krakow, and they crowded them in, thousands and thousands of people, and they forced them to stay 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 in one room. There were no beds. You were just laying on the floor. No, a few blankets with mostly straw. It was a terrible place. And every so often they would come in and just kill people. The Nazis simply amused themselves by killing children or anybody they didn't like. It was a terrible place. And from there, they took him usually to the extermination camps or to labor camps. My father's family in Krakow numbered over 200. They all went into the ghetto because where else were they going to go? So Jewish people went into the ghetto.
At this time, when you went to the ghetto, were you still allowed to be with your family? And also, how did people get food in the ghetto?
Every person got a certain ration. It wasn't enough to live on, but it was something. And yes, you were able to be with your family. So we decided to go into the ghetto because we'll be together. As my father is packing, a young man by the name of Michael Lieber walks up to him. He says, "Mr. Lesser, you know how I feel about Lola, your daughter. I'm in love with her, and someday I'd love to marry her. But do me a favor, come to the same community that my father and I are moving to. The community is called Niepolomice. It's a mouthful." He says, "Okay." Well, my father heard that. Well, he had a choice of going into the ghetto or to Niepolomice. He chose Niepolomice. That was miracle one, because all the people who went into the ghetto, my father's family, over 200, were all taken to Belzec. A few months later, to Belzec. There was an extermination camp, and everyone was killed. Everybody was killed. So it was a miracle. We moved to Neapolomice. In Neapolomice, as we were leaving Krakow in a wagon, horse and buggy, we found out that my father had 1,000 American dollars that he saved up for a rainy day. That was a fortune in those days. So he took the money and he pasted it in a religious book. And he put it into a sack full of other religious books. And we're now on our way to Neapolomice. And on the way, we're being stopped. Halt, and two husky Nazis jump on the wagon. The first thing they wanted to know, do we have any Jewish literature? Well, they saw two sacks full of books. They picked it up, heaved it on the side of the road. They had a mountain full of books. They were going to have a bonfire after everybody passed that road. My sister Lola spoke in beautiful German. So she walks up to him. She says, look, my father is a writer. He wrote his autobiography. Let him keep this one book. He looked at her. Maybe he liked the way she spoke German. He says, okay, I'll give you 5 minutes if you can find it. Well, the whole family started to climb on the mountain books. All these books looked alike. They're leather-bound, brown or black. And we keep sliding down. After 5 minutes, he chased us away without a book. You couldn't recognize my father. He's going to a new community with a family of 6 feet. We were a family of 7, but my oldest sister, Goldie, was when the war broke out, she was in Munkács, Hungary. With my grandparents of my mother's side, they lived in Munkács. My father's side were in Kraków. My mother's side, the family came from Munkács. Stuck there when the war broke out, which was good, because Munkács was a free country, while Poland was Nazis. We arrive at the town, Neapolomice. My future brother-in-law, Michael, rented a house for us to move in. A half a house lived a farmer, apple orchard farmer, and the other half was for us. Between the two apartments, there was a baking oven. People used to bake their own breads in those days. Anyway, my my future brother-in-law saw what happened to us. My father had no more money. He brought my father a sack full of flour, figuring he'll be able to bake bread to feed the family. When my father saw the flour, his face lit up. Instead of baking bread, he started to bake pretzels, white pretzels. All you need for pretzels is flour, water, and salt. And those ingredients he had. Then he took the pretzels to the neighboring bars and offered it for sale. It was a novelty. They started to buy the pretzels. And that's how my father became a little baker in that community. I was 12 years old. I remember baking with my father all kind of cookies, breads, mandel bread, all kind of different cookies. He became a little baker, and it lasted about a year. And meanwhile, Lola and Michael get married. When they got married, they moved out of our house, and they moved into a duplex. One side of the duplex lived the owner, who happened to be the mayor of that community, the mayor of Neapolomice. One night, the mayor comes home from work and he says, "Michael, Lola, save yourselves. I heard the rumor there is going to be a raid against the Jewish people tonight or tomorrow night." When Michael heard that, he went out and he hired a wagon with the driver, horse and buggy with the driver, and we snuck out in the middle of the night. The only place we could go was a city called Bochnia. The nearest city was called Bochnia. Bochnia had a ghetto. That meant we had to go inside the ghetto. Bochnia Ghetto had a very bad reputation. What happened? Every so often, 2 or 3 dump trucks would come into the ghetto, and the Nazis would go from house to house, pull out the children from their beds, and throw them into these dump trucks. The parents were screaming for the children are screaming for the parents. As they filled up the 2 or 3 dump trucks, they would pull out of the ghetto, and the parents were running behind these trucks and screaming for their children. But these cultured people had machine guns at the end of each truck, and they would mow down the parents running behind these trucks. That resonated throughout Europe. Stay away from Bochnia Ghetto because of these atrocities. But we had no choice. We had to get in there. And the good thing we went in there, because that night there was a raid against the Jewish people in Neapolomice. And they went from house to house. They pulled out all the Jewish people into trucks. They took them to the forest. The men were given shovels to dig a ditch, and everyone was shot. How did we know this? Lola and I are the only survivors from our family of 7. After the war, we went back to Neapolomice to find out what happened to everybody. And the farmers were telling us, as they are going to the forest to pick mushrooms and berries to sell in the market in the morning, they saw these trucks pull in. They were hiding behind trees, and they saw everything. They said the ground was moving for 3 days later. They didn't care if you're dead or alive. They buried you. So now we are in Bochnia. The driver unloads us in the middle of the street on a sidewalk. He says, "This is as far as I go." He leaves, and we are sitting with all our belongings on the sidewalks. And Michael sees a school buddy, a guy who went to school with, by the name of Farber. Farber was a Jewish policeman. He was wearing a uniform. They had no weapons, but he had a baton on the side of him. Farber says to Michael, "What are you doing here?" And Michael tells him the story. Farber tells him, "Don't worry, I'll find you a place to live." He takes Michael, Lola, and his parents to one place, and then he takes my father, my mother, myself, my little brother to another place, just to tell you what ghetto living was like. It was one room, there were 8 other people. Now we were 12 in one room, no beds. All we had was straw on the ground. They were blankets on top of the straw. Blankets were hanging from the ceiling, separating each family. And this is how we lived in this room. Everybody had to work. If you didn't work, you didn't get any rations. I worked, I was 12 years old, maybe 13, I don't remember. But I worked in a uniform factory. I sewed on buttons on uniforms. It was easy work, but it was 13 hours a day with that very little food and very little sleep. That went on for over a year. One evening, Farber walks over to my future brother-in-law, Michael. My brother-in-law, he was married already, Michael. He says, Michael, Lola, save yourselves. I heard the rumor there's going to be a raid tonight in the ghetto. When Michael heard that, he took his family to a doghouse. You heard me right, a doghouse. As you lifted up the floor from the doghouse, there was a stepladder, and there was room for 7 people to hide, for the family to hide. So they went there. Now I'll tell you what happened. Michael is telling me this. As they were about to walk into the doghouse, another Jewish policeman walks up to him by the name of Morris Schiller. And Morris Schiller says to Michael, Michael, I know about your doghouse. If you don't take my mother and my sister along to hide, I'm going to tell the authorities. Well, there was only room for 7. Now there were 9. So Michael and Lola walked away. The mother ran out of him. No, you're newlyweds, you just got married. We lived our lives. Let us stay out. You go in. But Michael and Lola wouldn't listen. They walked away. And meanwhile, I'm going to tell you what our bunker was like, where I, my father, my mother, my little brother, the 4 of us, were hiding, was a beautiful, ornate place where you hang your jackets and your coats. A shop, as we call it. This house is where we were living in Nepalomice, in this house. You see that?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. You see these people on top?
Mm-hmm.
They were the wedding guests of Lola and Michael. I'm sorry. They were the wedding guests. Out of all these people, only 3 of us survived. The rest were all killed. Michael, Lola, and I. I am right here. You see it? The third from the right here, that's me.
So you were saying you were 12 years old at this point. And could you just share with us, was it just a constant state of fear that you were in as a 12-year-old boy? Like, of am I going to get killed today? Or what was it like inside?
I can't describe. It was terrible. I was always in fear, any moment, but I made sure that I pleased every Nazi. I did what they asked me. I did it right. No shortcuts. So that may have been what saved me. Anyway, we were hiding in a armoire. You know what an armoire is?
A large cabinet that stands, right? And you can put things in?
Cabinet. It was an armoire where you put your coats, your jackets, you hang them and your clothing in there. It was a small place. The door opens and you push the clothing apart. The back panel would slide apart. And the wall, there was a hole in the wall. And the 12 of us could crawl through that hole into the other side of the wall. The last person would close the doors behind them, put the clothing back, put back panel back in place. And we were hiding there, 12 of us, all night. And we heard screaming, shootings, dogs barking. We heard dogs are tearing apart our neighbors, and screams. Towards the morning, it got quiet. When it got quiet, we dared to come out. And when we came out, you wouldn't believe what our eyes are seeing. We saw dead people, our neighbors, torn apart by dogs laying in the snow. A mother holding an infant torn apart in the snow. People going around in push carts, picking up these bodies and pieces of bodies, placing them in the push carts, and then taking them at the ghetto square. In the ghetto square, they were piling them up as high as they could. They came with gasoline cans, and they poured gasoline over the bodies. And they started a Bochnia Ghetto bonfire, a human bonfire. Can you picture that? The screams, the ashes, the smell. It was something awful, something awful. I knew my sister Lola and Michael were hiding in a doghouse. So I went to the doghouse and I saw Michael, and he is telling me the story, what happened. That they couldn't go down because they were now 9 and only room for 7. So they walked away. As they were walking away, Michael and Lola see that friendly Jewish policeman, Farber. And Farber asked him, "What are you doing, Michael? Why aren't you hiding someplace?" He tells him this story about Morris Schiller. He says, "Don't worry, where my sister and her 2 children are hiding, there is room for you." And he took him to a neighboring leather tannery. Yeah, a leather tannery. And above the tannery, there was a water tank. He says, "My sister and her 2 children are hiding inside the water tank. Go up there. There is a step ladder you can walk up. Inside there is a rope. You can lower yourself. Stay there all night long. When you hear in the morning a knock on the tank, which I will give you a certain knock, that means the coast is clear. You can come out." All right? This is exactly what happened. and they climb up the ladder. They lower themselves, and they see that his sister is standing knee-deep in water. His little girl, the daughter, is standing waist-high in water, and the mother is holding an infant little boy asleep, and they're all shivering and shaking, and their little water rats swimming in the water, nibbling at their feet. It was terrible. Lola picked up the little infant, and Michael picked up the girl from the floor, and they stood there all night holding and shivering and shaking. And they can hear shootings, dogs barking, screaming all night long. The same thing we heard when we were hiding. Towards the morning, there was a knock on the tank. The coast is clear. They pulled themselves up on the rope and came down on the ladder after they put some circulation back into their feet. They wanted to see what happened to the doghouse with his family in the doghouse. So they went to the doghouse, and this is what they saw. The whole family laying in the snow with a bullet hole in their head. This little Marika, I don't know if you see her, she's at the end, still holding a doll that Lola made her for her birthday. Everybody dead. By the way, those pictures are pictures that my sister Lola, who survived, made from memory. And as she is an artist, she was an artist, she passed already anyway. Lola and Michael, when saw that, she started to scream. And Michael stopped her. He says, Lola, they're still burning bodies. They're going to hear you. If they hear you, it's all over. So Lola, with a quelched cry, they knew what they had to do. See, according to the Jewish religion, you're supposed to bury your loved ones within 24 hours or 48 hours if you can. So Michael and Lola went out and they found a rickety wheelbarrow. They put the family on the wheelbarrow. Little Marika still holding on to her doll. They went to the cemetery and they found a shovel. Michael is digging out a ditch. And they put the whole family into the ground. You see him? They brought the whole family in the ground. And they were putting the bodies into the cemetery, into the grave, when they see Morris Schiller. Morris Schiller says to them, it wasn't my fault. His own mother, his own sister were also shot. He says the graves that you put your family into it, you're going to have to take them out because I want it for my mother and my sister. Well, Lola started to cry. Michael says, well, he's got the power over you. There's nothing you can do. We have to take the family out. They put him on the wheelbarrow again. They found another spot and they buried him. While this is going on, there was a jeep coming up the hill, and it stopped at the cemetery gate. And two husky Nazis jump out of it, and they yell, Morris Schiller, Morris Schiller. He says, Jawohl, here I am. And he walks up to them. They pull out the revolver, they shot him. This is what they did for people who have seen too much. They didn't want to leave any witnesses. And the jeep went back down the hill. Lola and Michael are holding each other, crying, and they left. People were going around in pushcarts and loudspeakers. Anybody left in the ghetto must go register at the Judenrat, at the Jewish police station. If you didn't register, you wouldn't receive rations. You'll die. Anyway, to tell you the story from this point on till we're outside of the ghetto, and our whole family, and we brought out 5 other people from us to the ghetto. How that happened would take a long time. So I'll just tell you, if you read my book, you'll find out exactly how this happened. Because it involved my sister Lola, and it involved a Nazi commandant. It's too long of a story. But we're now outside the ghetto, and outside the ghetto, Michael befriends a truck driver who was hauling coal. And he asked him to convert his truck into a double-decker, coal on top, and between the chassis and the coal, there could be people hiding, Jewish people hiding. You'll take him to the border. The idea was to smuggle us to Hungary. But to get into Hungary, we had to get smuggled into Czechoslovakia first, and then from Czechoslovakia, smuggle into Hungary. Well, he converted this truck into a double-decker. See it?
Yes, sir.
10 people could hide inside the truck, 5 and 5, like sardines. The group that my sister took out from the ghetto, the 55 people, was a big family. And that family said that they will pay our way because we didn't have any money. But for rescuing them out of the ghetto, they would pay our way to be smuggled across. But we agreed that every truckload, there'll be 8 from their family and 2 from my family. So the first load, 8 from their family and 2, Michael and Lola went first. Why did they go first? Because you couldn't always trust these drivers. They would take your money up first and then take you to the police, to this SS or Gestapo, turn you in, and they get ransom money for turning in Jews who are escaping, okay? So you couldn't trust them. We made up a passport between us. If the truck driver comes back with the right passport, that means you can trust them. And they went first. 2 days later, the truck driver comes back with the right passport. So now it was time for another 10 of us to go in. My father insisted that I and my little brother go next. So just to tell you, it was like being entombed, going in 5 and 5 below us. I am pushed against my little brother, Tuli, and they close the door, and the truck leaves. I say goodbye to my father, mother, and we're leaving. An hour outside of Bochnia, we're being stopped. Halt! And we can see through the cracks of the truck. We can see soldiers with rifles. And they talked to the driver. We didn't hear what they were saying because the roar of the engine was so loud. But then the truck started to move again. We felt relieved until we saw that on the driver's side on the step, there is a soldier with a rifle. Now we hear soldiers walking on top of the coal dust starting to filter through. My little brother is about to sneeze, and I'm holding his nose. 2 hours. After 2 hours, the truck stops, and we are figuring they're going to shoot us now someplace, kill us. We're saying our prayers. All of a sudden, we hear, Dankeschön, Dankeschön, Danke. They were just hitchhiking. Imagine talking about miracles. There were soldiers on top of 10 Jewish people hiding under their feet, and they didn't know it. And the driver takes us to the forest, and he unloads us, and he says, walk into the forest about 300 yards. There is a tool shed. Inside the tool shed, there is the smuggler. He's waiting for you. And sure enough, it was nighttime. We finally found the tool shed. We walk in the tool shed, and there's the smuggler who happened to be a forest ranger. He was a forest ranger. He was also smuggling people across for money. So now he takes us in the middle of the forest. He tells us, quietly lay down on your stomachs and look up. We look up and we see soldiers are walking back and forth with dogs. And very dark, we can hardly see them. He says at 3 o'clock, they will walk down the hill and they'll meet other soldiers and they will have a little ceremony, and then the other soldiers will walk back up to the border. While this happens, there is about 5 or 10 minutes we can go across. Sure enough, at 3 o'clock, we see them walking down the hill with their dogs. When they were far away, we shimmied our way up to the barbed wire. He picked up the barbed wire and made sure we went across. Then he told us quietly, he says, be very careful because there is a big ravine at the end of the mountain here. You know, a big drop at the end of the mountain. So sit down, hold hands, quietly slide down the mountain. When you come down, quietly, if you tumble, it's all over. They're going to hear us. They're going to come back. We sat down quietly, holding hands, and we slide down the mountain. Pitch black, you can't see a thing. We stop at the plateau, and I ask my little brother, are you all right? He says, yes. When somebody taps me on my shoulder, I jump out of my skin. Who in the world, in the middle of nowhere? He says, Beinisch? Well, nobody called me that except my immediate family. And he says, I'm your Uncle Belo. your mother's brother. I came here when your sister, how did you know where, what? When your sister Lola and Michael went across, they contacted us and they told us exactly where to find you. So I waited here for you. Well, to tell you the story, we had to cross another border. It's too long of a story. Again, I'll tell you, read my book. It's very, very interesting.
I'll also put a link in the video description so that everyone listening and watching can pick up a copy of your book. And I would encourage all of us to go and read the book and be enlightened.
You see it?
Yes, living a life that matters. From Nazi nightmare to American dream.
Once you take the book, you won't put it down. You won't put it down. But it's very important that you buy the book directly from us, because if you buy the book from the internet, it's forgery. We don't get anything out of it. And the Zahor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation needs the money. Please buy the book from Zahor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. You have that information?
Yes, sir. I have that information, and I'll also put that in the description of the video so that people can pick up the book there. And also, if they want to make any donation, they can go to that site and support your good work.
And we'll mail it out to you. I'll also put your name, inscribe your name on it. If you give the name while you're ordering, anything you wish, and I'll write up something, okay? We are now in Budapest, Hungary, and we meet Lola and Michael there, and we have a beautiful reunion, and we have a meal together. And I had to do something I didn't like to do. My uncle takes me to the police station, and they put my little brother and I into a cell, and they closed the door, and my uncle goes to the police station upstairs. He signs some papers, and then he comes back down, and they released us. But it was quite a strange feeling being into the cell. But we were minors, so he had to vouch for us that he'll be our guardian. And as our guardian, they made us legal in Budapest and Hungary, legal, and they let us out in his guardianship. All right, we're now boarding a train. We wanted to go to Munkac. Munkac is where my sister Goldie was. In Munkac were my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts. Everybody from my mother's side lived in Munkac. Yeah, I didn't tell you that before, but my mother would take us kids from Kraków to Munkac every summer. We would spend Munkac with her family. And in the winter, we'd come back to Krakow, and I would go to school. So my father's side business was all in Krakow. Okay, so we go on the Munkac. In the morning, we arrived at Munkac. The whole family is waiting for us. My sister Goldie, we have a reunion. And anyway, I told them what's happening in Poland. They hardly believed it. And I didn't believe it myself. And I didn't know everything that's happening. I didn't know what's happening in these death camps. No one told me that. If my father knew, he didn't tell me that. So I told him it's true. And if the Nazis ever march into Hungary, I told my uncle, who was a very rich man, he had a yardage goods store where he sells yardage goods for suits and dresses. And above the store, he had his house. He invited me and my little brother to stay in his house. He also had 2 sons, so we were together. I told my uncle, I says, Uncle, if the Nazis ever come in, they're going to take everything away from you. It would make sense if you took some of your assets and convert them into diamonds so that we can carry the diamonds on our body. Well, my uncle listened to me. And one day he comes home with boxes full of shoes. And a pair of shoes for every member of the family. He told us, in the heels of the shoes, know that there are diamonds in all the heels of the shoes. And he gave every member of the family a pair of these beautiful black shoes. I'm telling you this because there's a story behind it. And in Hungary, life was normal. People were going to dances, to proms, to restaurants and dancing and new movies. Things were normal.
May I ask, what was that like to go from what your life was like in Poland to back to normal reality? That must have been really difficult.
It was unbelievable. It was great. But I was hoping for my parents to come down. They were coming in the next coal transport. But one day somebody came across the border who knew my parents. He told us what happened. He says, someone in one of those houses, a Polish person, saw what was happening. He called the police because he was getting ransom money for people trying to escape. And they came and they pulled everybody out of the truck. All 10 people, including the driver. They were now 11. And all 11 of us, all 11 of them were put against the wall and shot. That's when I found out my parents were killed. Life in Mukac was wonderful, but didn't take long, and the Nazis just marched in like they were invited guests. And this is what they told us. When they came in, they knew every Jewish person where they lived. They knew their addresses, they knew their businesses, they knew their education. How? They didn't have computers in those days. IBM had punch cards, and they would sell these punch cards to anyone who would listen. IBM does not deny it. They say they had no idea for what purpose they're going to use this information. So they sold it to them. This is what they told the Jewish people. You will all be relocated to Germany. Germany needs workers. Able-bodied men and women will be working. Children will be schooled. Older people will be cared for. Bring along all your valuables that you can carry, but leave everything else behind. And most people believed it. And they started, and about two months later, they were already putting people in death trains and taking them to their death train, to the death. Unbelievable what happened. They told us to bring along all your valuables that you can carry, otherwise you'll be shot. And they marched us to the trains, 82 cattle car. He lined us up with cattle cars, 82 cattle car. All of a sudden, I see two men with a stretcher, bringing a stretcher, and they set it down by my feet. I look at it, I see a woman, bloodied, black and blue, and I look closely. It's my sister, Goldie. I says, Goldie, what happened to you? She says, I tried to escape. I went as far as the railroad, and a Hungarian gendarme who went to school with me recognized me. He turned me into the Gestapo and the SS. They beat her to a pulp. And now they ordered us to go into the train. There was 80 us. Wouldn't be so bad if we didn't have all these bundles and valises. Now it was so tight that if somebody wanted to sit down, someone else had to stand up. They had 2 buckets of water in the corner. Once the water was gone, there was no sanitary facilities, no toilets. 80 people, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, no toilets. So they started to use those buckets. As the buckets filled up, it was overflowing. Now you were lucky if you had something to sit on, not to be on the floor. It was full of human waste. Can you imagine what it was like?
No, I cannot imagine what it was like, honestly.
It was unbelievable. I can't describe it. But after the third night, we arrived at a place and we see a sign, a railroad says Auschwitz. Auschwitz is Polish for Auschwitz. But we don't know that. We don't know Auschwitz. We don't know Auschwitz. We're going to Germany. The train pulls into a gate, and we see on top of the gate it says, Arbeit macht frei. Labor gives you freedom. Those were the gates of Auschwitz. The train stood there for an hour. Then it's traveling again. It's still nighttime. 3 kilometers down, it stopped. And that was called Birkenau. Birkenau was part of Auschwitz. Birkenau was where all the killing, most of the killing was done in Birkenau. We don't know this. They come to Birkenau, it was still night, they open up the gate, and people with striped clothes, and there were soldiers with dogs barking, and the soldiers were screaming, leave all belongings where it is, don't pick anything up. Women and children to the right, men to the left. I'm holding on to my sister Goldie, my little brother Tully. They're just being pushed away from me, pulled away from me. My sister-in-law, Goldie and Tully, went directly to the gas chambers. I didn't know that. I had no idea. But this was a strange place. I went with the man. Now, this was another miracle because I was 15 and a half. I wasn't a child and I wasn't a man either, but I went with the man. Why? I figured if this is a labor camp, they want you to labor, and if you labor, they'll feed you better. That was the only reason, but that was a big miracle. Had I gone with my sister, my little brother, I would have been the gas chambers.
As you said, can you imagine? I'm trying to imagine what it would have been like to arrive at Auschwitz. And I guess the only thing I can really come up with is, was there just like a heaviness in the air? Was it like something you had almost never experienced before? Could you feel how bad it was, or did it feel normal? Or
it felt like snow. Well, it wasn't snowing, it was ashes. And we see 5 chimneys with smoke and flame coming out of these chimneys. And these ashes are, every time we made a step, a footstep left a footstep like in snow. Funny smell. We're moving forward. My uncle, my cousin, and I forward, and we see a man in a white frock like a doctor. He had a white glove. He goes left, right, left, right. Every person, he sent him to the left or the right. And every once in a while, he would ask somebody a question. When I came close enough, I heard him ask a question of a young man. Kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? Can you run 5 kilometers? Or would you rather go by truck? He said he had a bad knee, he would rather go by truck. Poor soul, not realizing that meant certain death, because they sent him to the right. But who knew? I don't know right, left, what it means. But it didn't make sense to me. Why would he ask, can you run 5 kilometers when I see the barracks are right here? The barracks are right here. I figured he's testing us to see if we're strong enough to work. So I tell my uncle, my cousin, I spoke German. I tell my uncle, my cousin, let me go first. But whatever he asks you, tell him you're healthy, you can work, you're strong, you can run, you can do anything you want. Let me go first. But I go first, so I come in front of Dr. Mengele. You heard of him, didn't you? Mengele?
I don't think so. What was his name?
Mengele. He was the angel of death. He decided who should live, who should die with a flick of finger. So I go in front of him and I salute him. I stretch myself out. Remember, I'm 15 and a half. Stretch myself out. I said, 18 Jahre alt, gesund und arbeitsfähig. I'm 18 years old. I'm healthy and I can work. He asked me, kannst du 5 kilometers laufen? Can you run 5 kilometers? I said, jawohl, yes. He sent me to the left. My uncle, my cousin followed. Unfortunately, my sister and my little brother went to the right. I never saw them again. They marched us in to a big auditorium, just like a school auditorium, and they told us to get undressed, get out of your shoes, walk up to the barbers, they're going to cut your hair all over, and then walk into the showers. Well, I got undressed, but I have shoes with diamonds. remember? I had diamonds in my shoes. I didn't want to get out of them. My uncle who gave me those diamonds and his son, they got out of their shoes. They're ordered to get out. I didn't. And I walk over naked. Picture this. I'm naked and I walk over to these barbers. They cut my hair all over. They weren't exactly gentle the way they cut it either, believe me. But no one says anything about my shoes. The guards are walking back and forth and looking at us all over. It's like God blinded their eyes. They didn't say anything about my shoes. And I walk in to the showers with my shoes on. There in the showers, they gave us striped clothes and a pair of shoes, wooden soles, gambas on top. I got into those shoes. I put my leather shoes right under my arms, under my jacket, and I walk out. We all are walking out to the barracks. At the barracks, they line us up, they count us. The Stubmelteste, the man in charge of the barrack, I can tell in his accent that he was a Polish inmate. He's speaking in a broken German. He says, "Ha, you Hungarian Jews. You think you're here on vacation? Think again. You see those chimneys, those ashes, those flames? Those are your mothers, your fathers, your brothers, and your sisters. And if you don't behave, you're going to wind up just like them, ashes." I couldn't believe my little brother, my sister, ashes. He must be pulling my leg. I can't believe this. And we go into the barrack and we pick a bunk. My uncle, my cousin, and I picked an upper bunk. We laid down. We were so tired we fell asleep. About an hour later, my cousin wakes me up. "Ben, get up, kid." I said, "What?" He says, "Listen." And I hear a chanting or a crying or a laughing. I don't know, singing. What is it? Doesn't make sense. Then he says, "Look, one board and the wall was missing, and I see a flame shooting up." He says, "What is it?" I says, "I don't know. I'll find out." You see, I saw that the Stubmelteste was a Polish inmate. So I walked up to him, and I speak to him in Polish. "Przepraszam bardzo, excuse me, sir, tell me, what is happening here? What's going on?" He started to laugh, but he was very happy to hear somebody speak his language. And he couldn't stop telling me what's happening in Auschwitz. I could be here another half hour and tell you what's happening in Auschwitz. Unbelievable. He told me, "Ha, you Hungarian Jews, you don't know anything." He says 5 weeks or 2 months before Germany was ever occupied, before Germany occupied Hungary, we in Auschwitz knew they're going to occupy Hungary because they made us dig ditches for fiery pits. They knew when the Hungarian Jews are coming in, the trains will come in one after another. There won't be much time to just burn them in the crematoriums. They needed pits, fiery pits, to throw the overflow. because the trains are coming in fast and furious. And he tells me it takes a half an hour, 30 minutes to kill a person. In the gas chambers, they didn't have time to give us 30 minutes to get dead. After 15 minutes, everybody was laying on the floor. They looked through the glass windows. They saw everybody on the floor. They would open the doors, the gas chambers, air it out. 15 minutes later, they would allow the Sonderkommando. They were the ones to pull out these bodies, cut their hair, pull out their gold teeth, check their body to see if there is any hidden jewelry or something, then put them into these buggies, 5 on a buggy with the rope on top, and push him on these tracks and push him to the crematorium. But this was too slow. Now they had a truck, and they would take these half-dead bodies, throw them in this truck, and on top of these half-dead bodies, they would throw the children. They wouldn't even allow the children into the gas chamber because they took up too much space. But these children were still alive. They would throw these children on top of the truck of these dead bodies. And they took them to the fiery pits, and they threw those children and those half-dead people into these fiery pits. I made a big mistake. I didn't believe what he was saying. So I snuck out in the middle of the night, from my barrack to the other barrack, because the other barrack was behind the other barracks was the fiery pit. I snuck out, and I saw them picking up a child, screaming and running toward it. I couldn't believe what I've seen this. I went back. I made a mistake because my eyes have seen it, and it's always with me. I can never forget that. What can I tell you? This was every day they were a appel. I don't know if you know what appel is. We had to get together. They counted us. Early in the morning, we had to go out naked, stand there, and they counted us. And the Nazis looked at our bodies. If they thought you were too skinny to work, they pulled you out to the gas chambers. This was called selection. Every morning you had to go through that selection. 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they pulled me, my cousin, and my uncle into a truck, and they took us to a labor camp. That labor camp was called Durnhau. Durnhau was a rock quarry. What's a rock quarry? As they dynamited the mountain and the boulders were coming down, it was our job with sledgehammers, break them into manageable pieces and throw it into mining carts, run it down the tracks, the mine to a grinding machine where they ground it into gravel, and then push these carts back up the hill. It was back-breaking work. I didn't think my uncle would survive this, so I bribed this kitchen chef with my diamonds and my shoes to give my uncle a job in the kitchen. He took my diamonds and he gave him a job in the kitchen. It got a little easier for us because my uncle could eat in the kitchen, and his ration he would then share with his son and me. So make it a little easier. But every day when we came home, we had to line up in the yard. All the inmates had to line, even the people in the kitchen had to come out and line up, and everyone was counted. And after everyone was counted, dismiss you, and you would go take your rations and you go into your barrack. But this time it was different. We were counted, and we are counted, and the commandant comes down with his Fräulein, his girlfriend, and he says, I'm going to show the Schweinhund a lesson they'll never forget. What happened? 3 inmates escaped, and because they escaped, he orders his henchmen to pull out every 10th person in line to receive 25 lashes. Well, I'm standing, my uncle is in front of me, my cousin is behind me, and as they're pulling out every 10th person, I can see that my uncle is going to be a 10. So I push him behind me, and I took his place. They took all of us number 10 into the middle of the yard, and they brought down bundles full of stakes, about 4 feet stakes, one by one, hardwood stakes. And they brought down a sawhorse. Do you know what a sawhorse is?
It's a wood that holds up other woods that you can cut, right?
Right. 2 sawhorses, you put a log of wood, you cut it. And this is what they ordered us to do. Stand in front of the sawhorse, tiptoe. The heels cannot touch the ground. Bend over. One man is pulling your trousers tight. The other one starts to hit. And you have to count out loud. Eins. If you miscount, you start from 1 again. If your heels touch the ground, you start from 1 again. If your stomach touches the 2x4 on the sawhorse, you start from 1 again. So if you ride it like an air, and one man's pulling your trousers. The first man goes up. I was number 4. The first man goes up. He miscounted. The heels touched the ground. He touches the 2x4 on the sawhorse again and again, and finally he falls. When he falls, the commandant goes over, kicks him in the face. Get up. He couldn't. He pulls out a revolver and he shoots him right in the temple. His girlfriend, his Fräulein, walks up to him, gives him a hug and a kiss, like he just performed a heroic act. He killed a man.
If I may ask, what gave you the will to live in these circumstances? To keep going and to keep being so resourceful and figuring out how to navigate all the cruelty? Like, what inspired you to just keep going?
Let me explain it. But it's human nature. You want to live. I was young. I felt I want to live. You're not going to believe this. I was number 4. Number 2 went up. He too miscounted. He touched the 2x4. Again and again he falls. The commandant goes over, kicks him in the face. Get up. He couldn't. He shoots him. So we have 2 dead people. The third one was a little younger. And as they beat him, they miscount. He touches the floor again and again. He yells out, please have mercy on me. Don't kill me. So the commandant says to him, then stand up come over here and face me. The poor guy stood up, made 4 or 5 steps, and he fell. The minute he falls, the commandant goes over, kicks him in the face. Get up. He couldn't. He shoots him. You have 3 dead bodies, and Ben Lesser is next in line. All I can tell you is it's a funny feeling. You feel inside of you, it's all shaky. But I have to do it right. And I go up, I tiptoe, I bend over without touching the 2x4. One man is pulling my trousers. The other one starts to hit. Eins, zwei, drei. And I feel every time he hits me, my skin is torn apart. Just ripped apart, torn apart. Just ripped apart. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Finally, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 25. I made it. I screamed out, I made it. The guy holding my trousers tight says to me in Yiddish, go over and thank the commandant. So I stand up. Blood is running down the back of my legs. My back is torn apart. I walk over to him, salute him, and say, Danke schön, Herr Kommandant. Thank you very much, Herr Kommandant. When he hears that, he puts his arm on my shirt collar, twists me around. I'm figuring, what now? He twists me around facing the number 10s who are still to be beaten. He says, now, I told you could be done. If you do it like this, Junge, you have nothing to worry about. If you do it like this, young one, you have nothing to worry about. And while this is going on, there is a commotion at the gate. They caught those 3 inmates who escaped. They were pulling him in bloody. You couldn't recognize him. The commandant, just like a child who gets tired of a toy and throws it away, he told us, all of us, number 10, to go back to our lines. He tells his henchmen to bring down a portable gallows, and we all had to watch like they were hanging, each one individually, and we had to watch. If you closed your eyes, they hit you. I see the last man, just a little younger, they put the noose around him. He started to yell out in Hebrew a Jewish prayer, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu. When they heard that, they kicked his stool out from under him. They wouldn't let him complete Adonai Echad, the last 2 words, God is one. They wouldn't, they were such Satanists. They dismiss us like nothing ever happened. Go for your rations, go to the barracks and shower, whatever. For weeks, I could not sleep on my back. I had to sleep on my stomach because my back was torn apart.
As I'm listening to you share this, I feel angry, and I'm just like at how unjust all of this is. And I'm wondering, like, for you and the other prisoners, was there any place at all for anger, or was there just like fear and let's survive? Was there any place for anger, at least inside yourself, or would that just get you killed?
It's just yourself, inside yourself. You couldn't show it because they looked you over every morning as they counted you. and they didn't like the way you look. They killed you. They shoot you right there. It's a life doesn't mean a thing to them. Many of them just enjoyed killing. You knew each guard already, and we knew to stay away from which guard if we could. One night we heard cannon fire, like the front was closing in. That morning we reported to work. There was a loudspeaker that says, "No one is going to work today. Line up in rows of 5 and march out. The camp is being evacuated." So we line up a road. I was next to my cousin. My cousin, who was older than I, and my uncle was already in the kitchen. We couldn't say goodbye to him. So without seeing the uncle, we marched out. That was called a death march. Because if you could not keep up pace with the soldiers, they shot you. And all day long you heard pop, pop, pop. They keep shooting people. We don't know what happened to our uncle. We've never seen him again. But now we're marching. In my book, I said we marched 3 or 4 weeks. Recently, I had a German professor contact my daughter and telling her, "I read your father's book and I loved it so much. Would you give us permission to translate it into German?" And then he told us, "Tell your father that he made 2 mistakes in his book. One mistake was he says that he marched 3 or 4 weeks. He says Mr. Lesser marched 7 weeks, 460 kilometers from Durnhau to Buchenwald. We are after 7 weeks. I don't know how we survived 7 weeks of march. We were like zombies, just walking. Day, night, it didn't mean anything to us. We walked."
Like, you were a teenager at this time in your life. And I think when I was a teenager, at least, it was a time of like kind of figuring out who you are versus, what other people want you to be, and sort of having your own thoughts, your own world, your own hopes and dreams. So when you were walking, did you have any sort of hope that kind of kept you going, even though you were...
Yes. My cousin got very weak on me. He says, "Just let me sit down and they'll all pass and they'll shoot me." He says, "I can't take it anymore." I says, "No, Isaac, you're going to survive this and I'm going to survive this. We're going to survive this together." I had a lot of hope that I will survive it. And I did everything right, but I didn't remember, because day and night I didn't know that I was 7 weeks. All I know, the last week, my shoes fell apart. And now I was walking barefooted on snow. Without shoes, barefooted on snow. And I had to march fast with the guards, because if you slow down, they shot you. It's when you tell the story now, I don't believe it happened. But I'm here, it happened. And finally we arrived to Buchenwald. Buchenwald was a major camp. They counted us. They told us to go inside this barrack. They're going to feed you. You're going to take a shower. You're going to sleep. Tomorrow morning, you have to be back here on the same spot, because Buchenwald is also being evacuated. So this is what we did. We went in, we ate something, and they took us into a shower. I don't have it here, but I do have a picture of that shower where I am in the shower. I don't know how this picture was taken, but it was sent to my daughter. It's a whole story behind this. I don't have the time to tell you. That was taken in Buchenwald. I was, you see all the naked men, and there is my face. And from there, next morning, we went to lined up, and they counted us, and they marched us out. About not too far, 20 or 30 yards out of the camp, we see railroad cars lined up like toys. They counted us 82 cattle car, and they told us to march in, to get in. Well, my cousin was weaker than I, so I push him up, and I says, find a place against the wall so we can rest our back instead of going to Auschwitz. I remember there were people all around me, and it was terrible. He did. He found a spot against the wall and a spot for me next to him. We're standing there. 80 people go in. They close the door. An hour later, they opened the door and they threw in 80 loaves of bread. 80 loaves of bread. A loaf of bread for every person. Those people who were next to the door were grabbing 3 or 4 or 5 bread. I was against the wall, all of us against the wall. Away from the door, we had nothing. We don't know where we're going, for how long we're going to go. I have to have a bread. So I climbed over the sitting inmates over their heads to get to the door, to wrestle out the bread from somebody who has many. While I was climbing, somebody stabs me. I feel a stab. My mouth is filling up with blood. But I can't stop. I have to get a bread. I get a bread from this guy. We had a bunch of them. He kicks me. I put it in my pocket here, and I go back to my cousin. He says, Ben, what's happening to me? You're bleeding all over. I put my hand here, and it went through my tongue. My finger went right through my tongue. To this day, I have a mark here. But, I filled up because I was skinny then and was in the middle of my throat. Now it's over my chin bone. I don't know how we survived this. How I didn't get an infection. I tore a piece of my trousers and I put it dirty. Don't ask. Miracle. It didn't get an infection. I had this one loaf of bread in my pocket, and I rationed it between my cousin and myself, the size of a half an egg. Each night at midnight, I gave him a half an egg, and I took half an egg, size of a half an egg bread. It lasted us 2 weeks. Imagine the willpower. We're starving, a half an egg a day. I had this, I never touched it, except at midnight, exactly giving my cousin a piece. And I took a piece. It lasted 2 weeks. But the train is still going. Another week. No food, no water. People are dying. There are dead people all around me. People are screaming. There was cannibalism. You can't even tell you what was been on. And everybody is dead. After 3 weeks, we arrive at a place called Dachau. Dachau is a concentration camp. They open the doors and they yell, anyone who can walk out of that train, walk over the tracks into the yard of Dachau. Well, I remember from 80 of us in the cattle cart, there were 80 of us, only 4 of us walked out alive. I, my cousin, and 2 more men. The rest were all dead or dying. They were all dead. They told us to go over the tracks. The night before, there was raining, and there was water inside the tracks. And we were so thirsty, we dropped on the tracks licking the water. They saw us, they whipped us, get out, get in there. We go in there and we see a mountain full of dead bodies. They ran out of coal to burn the bodies in the crematorium. So they piled them up as high as you can see. And the barrack, right next to these bodies, they put us into that barrack. My cousin and I, on the floor, no bunk, nothing, no food. The inmates felt sorry for us. They gave us a little water that they can get out in. 1 day, 2 days, on the 3rd night, we hear, Befreiung, Americans, liberation, Americans. Wow. I tell my cousin, let's go out and see what's going on. Holding each other, we barely come out. We see the inmates are crawling on their hands and knees and kissing the boots of the American GI. They looked like gods to us. They liberated us. We're free. Whatever that meant. A GI walks up to, 2 GIs walk up to me. In their hand, they had a can of Spam. They opened it up, and it smelled so good. They handed it to me, and we made a mistake. We ate some of it. Both of us came down with dysentery. My cousin dies in my arm the night of liberation. Imagine, the night he liberated. He was free, and he dies in my arm. I won't let him go. I'm holding him. And they saw this. The guys in charge saw that. They came, they pulled him away. I followed, and my knees gave out from under me, and I fall. When I fall, they push me to a wall, and I was laying there for 2 hours or so, and a man walks up to me, nicely dressed. He asked me in a broken German, how many languages do you speak? And I told him, he says, Polish? I'm a Polish Jesuit priest. I came here with nuns and doctors, and we're opening up a field hospital in the yard of Dachau. I'm going to take you there. He picks me up like a sack of bones. I was 16 years old, over 60 years old already. And I weighed my baby 20 pounds, 25, maybe 30. Who knows? He picks me up, and I'm taking me to the infirmary. On the way, he told me something I'll never forget. He says, Benek, the injustice they did to you just because you're Jewish, the only crime you committed, you were born to Jewish parents, And for that reason, you have no right to live? What a bunch of idiots. And he carried me to the infirmary. I'll never forget this. Never forget this. We come to the infirmary. He hands me over to a nun. They put me on a white cot. And they took my vitals all over. I lay down on the cot, and I pass out. 5 weeks later, I wake up in a cemetery in Bavaria. So one building was made a hospital. This was actually, I was born there. They put me on a cot, and one day I open my eyes, and I see a nun, and she sees me open my eyes. She yelled for all the other nuns to come in. They were so happy to see. I was in coma for about 5 weeks. This is our marriage. My dear wife. We were married 72 years. The nicest marriage you ever saw. I don't remember a quarrel. Unbelievable, the kind of marriage we had. She passed about 2 years ago. Anyway.
Mr. Lesser, one thing I thought about that I've been thinking about throughout this whole conversation. I mean, there's so many things I want to ask you that I can't even keep track of all of my thoughts. But one thing that really stuck out was when you were on the truck and you were talking about how you couldn't trust people and they had to have the safe word to let you know that you could trust them. And then you just said that your wife, you were married for over 70 years. So was it hard for you to learn how to trust people after life after the concentration camp? Was it hard to trust her?
No, I have a good life, and I don't hate anybody. I don't have any enemies. Everybody is my friend. Why hate? The hatred has to stop. Hitler and the Nazis did not start with killing. They all started with hate. Hate, propaganda, and that's how it became. Killing meant nothing to them. What I didn't tell you is this was Dachau. I saw that mountain full of dead bodies in Dachau. This soldier, American soldier. Yeah. This is what they found when they came into Dachau. You know, when you see pictures of people laughing and jumping for pride, then they were liberated, okay? Those were not Jewish people. The Jewish people couldn't even get up, not alone jump happy. The Jewish people were crawling because they treated the Jewish people and the inmates differently. The Gentiles were treated completely different. Prisoners. They were fed well, not the Jews.
So you're saying that if I, as a Christian, someone from a Christian heritage, were also in the camp with you, that I would be treated completely different than you were?
Yes, you were. You were, Dachau was a prison, and they had all kind of prisoners in there. If they put you in jail, they send you to Dachau. They had political prisoners mostly, And they were treated pretty different, not good, but different. They were fed more, and they didn't make them do what we used to do, the kind of work. But the Jewish people were completely treated differently, and we were in different barracks. Unbelievable.
So you mentioned that you were liberated and you had freedom, and you said whatever that meant, like freedom, whatever that meant. How did you heal and recover and adjust to having a free life again after all of these horrors?
When I was first liberated, I was thinking to myself, what now? I have no family as far as I know, no home to go back to. The other prisoners all had a house to go back to or a home to get. The Jewish prisoners had no place. So, no, I didn't lose my faith. In fact, I regained my faith. Because at first, when I've seen them throwing live children into fiery pits, I asked, where's God? How is that possible? And I lost my faith. But after the war, I was thinking to myself, you know, God was crying. He was weeping during the Holocaust. Why? You see, he gave us all free will. If we humans are killing other people, God has no say-so. He gave us free will. He can't interfere. That was my reasoning to come back to religion. I'm not completely religious the way you should be, but I believe there is a God now. He may have been weeping during the war. His hands were tied because he gave us free will.
That's really amazing.
You know what? There is so much more to my stories that you heard, and what we were talking about 2 hours.
Yes, about 2 hours now. Mm-hmm.
Very important that you get my book. I want the world, not because we want to sell a book, but I want the world to know what went on in this world. And you can help me. You can help. If people want to make a donation to Zahor Foundation, it will be greatly appreciated. You see, Ben Lesser, Zahor Foundation, is not a museum or an organization that has donations. It's Ben Lesser himself. I decided to start the foundation. And Ben Lesser is donating from his pockets. Millions over the years. It's hard to believe it. I was grateful that also, this is my story, how I made my life after the war. I became, maybe you can say, a millionaire. But the money is gone now. Every month costs me $30,000 to run the foundation. And years, it's millions. I need donation, and we are a 501c corporation.
Yeah, so I'll certainly encourage everyone to pick up the book, because I'm sure that we've only barely scratched the surface, even though it's been a 2-hour conversation. I'm sure we've only just hit the very main points, and I'm sure there's many, many more things to learn in the book.
What about the story of me coming to America and becoming an American citizen and how I made a life for myself, a beautiful life? It's something that people could learn from it.
Okay, so what could we learn from that? First of all, and second of all, what do you think allowed you and drove you to be successful and be entrepreneurial versus just going into depression or resentment like I think so many other people would that would have had your same experience?
I felt that I survived for a purpose. And I had to find out what that purpose is. And that purpose happened to be Zachor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. So everything that happened after the war, they're going to see in the book, led me to this. It's unbelievable what I received from Germany. I wanted to show it to you. What I received from Germany, the highest award that any person can receive in Germany. You see it? And they gave it to me, a Jew, they gave it to me for having this Zachor Holocaust Remembrance Foundation. Because you don't know, I mean, I can be hours and tell you stories, what I am doing in Germany. I would travel there and speak in schools. And now, of course, I can't anymore with the oxygen and all that. In Bavaria, you know, Bavaria is part of Germany. In Bavaria, the Bavarian people received a Ben Lesser book. Every high school kid in Bavaria received one. Not the full book, a shortened book, the book about my Holocaust only, not to America. They made that out for free, the Bavarian government, and they gave it out to every high school kid. We're talking about hundreds of thousands.
I actually lived in Germany for about 6 months, and my roommate was from Bavaria, so I imagine that he probably read that book in high school.
And this German professor, which I didn't tell you, in this town that he lives, my death train, was standing there for 3 days and 3 nights. I don't know, I'm in a closed-in train, right? He is telling me, people were screaming, water, food, water, food. And the townspeople got together to get some food. They baked things and bread. But the guards wouldn't allow them. The guards took it themselves. They wouldn't allow it. But while the train is standing there, the Nazis needed 10 cattle cars empty. They needed 10 cattle cars empty. They emptied out the 10 cattle cars, the last ones from the train. There were 786 people. They made them sit and everyone was shot. All people were shot. They were thrown into a ditch. 3 weeks later, Eisenhower liberates that community, his community. And they see these dead people in the ditch. Eisenhower got very angry. And he made the townspeople, including children from the age of 12 on up, come, pull out these dead bodies, clean them up, dress them with a nightgown, put them in a separate casket. They made separate casket for everybody. And then buried them in separate graves. And they had the whole townspeople go around and look, see what you did. Well, what they did. Anyway, I don't have these pictures in front of me, but in my book you're going to see a lot of these things. And this German professor who wrote it asked for he translated my book in German. Then he asked if they can publish it, and now they published it in German. But to give each high school kid to see what happened to me during the Holocaust. Only, it's a book, it says you can meet him. On the front page it sees my picture, and it says you can meet him. And that was given out to hundreds of thousands of children.
As I'm hearing all these stories, I'm thinking that, on a big theme of my channel is this saying that I learned in India and from my better half, this very common Indian saying that the world is one family. And I'm just thinking, man, that might sound really naive to someone that like you who has experienced such inhumane and unjust treatment. So I guess I'm just wondering, what do you think about an idea like that? That like we are all one family. Do you think it's true, or do you think it's...
Yes, we're all human beings. Nobody is different except the languages or the foods are different, but we're all God's creation. So it's God's creation. You're not better than me, or I'm not better than you. We should learn to respect each other. We should live side by side and appreciate our differences rather than hate them. This is what the Bavarian government made. Holocaust and the death train that we were in weeks. And everything about the Holocaust, it's small, it's about 60 pages. That's what they gave to every student in Bavaria. Because they wanted each student to know what happened. What happened, and something like this could never happen again. But it did happen. It happened in different countries. I mean, people just don't learn.
And what do you say to people who say this never existed, that deny that the Holocaust ever happened?
How can you say that? Nothing in history has ever been as documented as the Holocaust. So how can you say this? I mean, unless you were just born today, you can say that. But if you lived a few days, you found out. They're saying that because they think if they say a lie long enough, some people will believe it. And the internet is so easy to get other students twist their minds. They hear stories. It's that lie. The Holocaust never happened. It's a lie. How can they say that? But the student doesn't know better. This is what they teach him. And if they don't teach you the Holocaust in school, they grow up not knowing. And they could become Nazis. Every school should teach us. And I had a lot to do with it, that right here in Nevada, this year is the first year they're teaching the Holocaust. Not
wow.
just not just the Holocaust, Black history, Indian history. History is history. You don't decide what you want to teach or not. History.
When I was in school, we grew up, we had to read, I think we were required to read at least one book on the Holocaust each year. Like I think 6th grade was Diary of Anne Frank. 7th grade was Night. Of course, I grew up in North Carolina. It's a different state, but I do know the school system is very different now than 20 years ago.
20 years ago, they taught you Night, let you read Night. I
think we read a memoir every year of middle school. I think it was Anne Frank, it was Night, and it was a memoir of someone in Denmark. I can't remember the name of the book, but I remember they were in Denmark.
You know, the man who wrote Night was a good friend of mine.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. Did
you know each other in the camps or only afterward? How did you know each other?
I didn't know him then, but I know him now. Elie Wiesel is his name. He's the one who, I believe he may have been in Auschwitz the same time I was there, because he was in Hungary when they sent him to Auschwitz, and I think he was from Maramorzh, a town very close to my town where I was.
Well, unless you have anything else you want to share, I have one question that I ask every person at the end of the interview. And I would love to ask you now if it's okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the name of the podcast is Becoming Who You Truly Are. And so I like to ask at the end of every conversation with every guest, what does it mean for a person to become who you truly are? And, you know, I'm especially interested in your answer, like in the context of everything you went through as a child and a teenager and how you navigated just surviving and then healing afterward. I really am fascinated to hear what you say. What does it mean for a person to become who they truly are?
I don't know. I'm not a professor that could tell you how others feel. I feel very strong that every human being, I respect them, and I want to be friends with them. I don't hate anybody except the perpetrators of the Holocaust. But just to give you an idea how open-minded I am, the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, was the biggest killer in history. He killed over 1 million people. His grandson and I were good friends. His grandson and I, it's a whole story how we met. But we went around to schools talking about the Holocaust, and he was also telling things that he knew. He was talking about his grandfather. I don't hate anybody. The Germans are I don't hate the Germans. I don't hate the Americans. They're all except the perpetrators of the Holocaust. And I don't think there are any of them around yet. Still. I don't think there are any around yet. Still. So what can I tell you? Every human, I respect them. I don't necessarily say I love them, but I don't hate. You see, the Nazis and Hitler did not start with killing. They all started with hate. Hate propaganda. That has to stop. The hatred has to stop. And you or I, we have to do everything possible we can I don't care if it's a German or a Greek. I love you. You're a human being. You have the same rights that I have. No one is better than you. And I'm trying to get through the Holocaust Remembrance Foundation to people get into my website. On my website, they're going to see a curriculum that I wrote for schools and for colleges, and many teachers are teaching out of it.
Mm.
They're going to see me, an AI. They see my picture in it. They could talk to me. They could even take me home in their phone and ask me questions in the phone, and I'll answer them. I'll answer it in your house. Just take me home.
Mm.
This is A1, AI, not A1, AI. Today it's a big thing. And I started it on my website 6 years ago or 7 years ago. No one heard of AI before. I paid a fortune to get it done because I wanted everyone to be able, 100 years from now, still talk to me and I'll answer.
Me. That's amazing.
It's amazing. And I wish I could tell every person, an audience. To this day, I go to schools, colleges, I talk. I don't travel much anymore, but mostly I speak on Zoom worldwide. I'm all over the world.
Well, Mr. Lester, is there anything else you want to add before we finish?
Just again, stop the hatred. You don't have to love everyone, but you don't hate. Everyone has the same rights as you have. We are all God's creation.
I thank you so much for your time. As I said at the beginning, it's a real honor and privilege to be able to speak to you and hear your story. And
likewise.
Thank you so much for listening to this deeply meaningful and impactful conversation that I have with Mr. Lester. It changed my life, and I hope it changed yours as well. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to the Patreon link in the description box below the video. And while supplies last, when you subscribe, I'll send you a free Audible copy of my book, Becoming Who You Truly Are. Thanks for watching and listening. And until next time, I wish you nothing but the best in your life's journey to becoming all that you truly